This does sound like a nightmare project. Oh my goodness.
I know.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Survive This Crit, the podcast where we combine our love for horror movies and RPGs to assess whether we could survive said horror movie. I'm your host, Nick DePino, and with me...
It's me, Kylie. I'm back. We are back for another Jaws deep dive.
Yep, the one, the only, the definitive shark movie, Jaws, whose fame could never be replicated. And in this episode, we're going to be diving deep into the details behind the film, how it was made, the origins, even the book that started it all. So, before we get into it, though, I just wanted to remind everyone real quick, make sure you leave a like on our video and make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Or if you're listening on Spotify, make sure you follow us so you never miss an episode. Leave a comment or rating, anything to help improve our performance on the all-holy algorithm.
And just a reminder to everyone that we are posting once a week now, so make sure to come back every week, every Friday, so you can get your little hit of movie and RPG goodness. So, I have a little bit about the book of this film. I'm sure that most people, but I didn't know before I started doing research on this movie, that it's actually based on a book called Jaws by Peter Benchley. And essentially, how Peter came up with this idea was he was sitting on the beach and he wondered what would happen if a shark terrorized a community, and then he ran with it. And ironically, in one of the documentaries I watched, his wife was like, I didn't think it was a very good idea at the time.
That sounds so anticlimactic. I thought it was going to be some big story about yes, I had a personal experience with a shark once, but no. I wondered what would happen, if a gorilla terrorized the city. I think I'll just write a book about it.
Sometimes the most simple philosophical questions lead into the most creative ventures, I feel like. It's a very simple concept, but the way that it was branched out into this whole world is just so fascinating.
So, that's interesting though that you bring that up, because I could have sworn I saw or I read something that said that he based a lot of it off of a series of 5 shark attacks that occurred all within a day of each other. Back in
that's
the
definitely
summer.
possible.
Yeah, it was the summer of 1916 off of the New Jersey shore. I was reading this article about it, and I believe I have it in one of my sources. I thought that was it, but you know what? Now, honestly, I want it to be what you just described there.
I'm sure though, after you pose that philosophical question, you would do research. So I think those two concepts probably worked hand in hand together.
Oh yeah, no, these are not mutually exclusive. I don't think so.
But I will say, the book had a lot more B plots that spread out within the characters. The mayor storyline was a lot more integral in the book. It highlighted more of the corruption, even cooperation with gangs. The book kind of takes more of a gang route.
Wait, you're saying the mayor is being paid off?
There was corruption to the bone in the book.
Whoa. But I went up to bat for the mayor last episode.
I know you did, and I was just sitting there watching you be like, meanwhile, I'm like, we should watch his head get bit off in our version of Jaws. But, you went up to bat for the corrupt mayor. What does that say?
I'm done now. I'm done. I'm done with this mayor. I gave him one shot.
I will say one last small thing about the book. Right before the book came out, Peter Benchley still didn't have a title. He was struggling with a title. Everything sounded too pretentious and wordy. I'm trying to think of one of the examples he gave in the documentary that I watched, but there was examples it was a lot of double meaning things that could apply to the corruption in the town as well as the shark in the sea. So it was very, very wordy titles, and eventually they landed on Jaws right before the book was supposed to be released. They're Jaws, and someone asked him like, what does that mean? He's like, I don't know.
It means Jaws.
It means Jaws. What do you think it means? So they came up with that title at the last minute, which honestly I think was perfect, because if they had done like a really long, pretentious title, I don't think it would have captured the everyman audience that it does, you know?
Oh yeah. Keep your titles short and sweet. Disney figured it out they do it very well.
They're getting worse at it over time, but back in the day especially, absolutely. But yeah, that's a little bit about the book. I did not read the book. Did not have time to, unfortunately, before recording this, but it was a huge success, which is why the producers rushed to make this movie. Like the book came out in 1974. So they saw that early reviews were very positive about the book. And it was really growing in popularity very fast. So the producers were like, okay, we need to make a movie on this now. And that's how they acquired the title for it. And this was back in February of 1974. However, later that year, there was an impending SAG strike. So they needed to make the film before June of 1974 ended, because otherwise the union would strike, the actors wouldn't be able to work, films would be shut down all over. So they really, really rushed this process.
And you said 74. That sounds like a really tight time frame to make a film. Okay. I was curious about that. Because I remember you saying the last episode they spent like 150 days filming. Oh my goodness. Okay. I'm trying to think like the logistics of all that.
Yeah. No, they had a very, very short timeline from the idea of like, oh, we're going to make a movie in February, but the movie has to be wrapped, at least principal photography, like, has to be wrapped by the end of June of that year. So that gives them like March, April, May, June. That gives them 4 months to make a movie. Granted, they don't have a screenplay. They don't have a cast. They don't have a director. So let's dive into the drama and the origins of this movie a little bit. So initially, they had a different director signed on to this movie. Every documentary I watched, nobody would name drop, which I think is fair because this director fumbled big time. In his initial pitch meeting with the producers, he was like describing how he wanted his opening shot to be. And then at the end of his pitch, he was like, and then the whale comes out and the audience sees the whale for the first time. And Peter Benchley, who was a part of this, was like, we cannot have a director who doesn't know the difference between a shark and a whale. Like,
yeah, I would agree.
So they let him go, and then Steven Spielberg, who had interest in this project, although he was slated to do something else at the time, was like, let me get in on this. But I think you have a little bit about Steven Spielberg to take us on a quick side route before we go back into the origins of the film.
Yeah. So, for people who don't know, Steven Spielberg, in this movie, in relation to this movie here, this was very early on in his career. This was, Jaws is basically, it was picked up by Universal Pictures. The producers' names were Richard Zanuck and David Brown. They were the people who were saying, like, they purchased the rights for the film for, it was $175,000 is what I heard. And prior to this film being made, we had talked about Steven Spielberg, only 26 years old, 27, depending on, what exact year you're looking at. That put me to shame. I was like, man, I'm 29.
I was like, I'm 26 right now. That's crazy.
What have I accomplished? I haven't directed Jaws. But anyway, before this, he had only directed 2 movies. One was called Sugarland Express and a direct-to-television film called Duel. So before that, even though he was, an avid film lover, he took a passion of it in his teens, and he even won at a film festival in his teens for like a 40-minute movie that he made. It was a war movie called Escape to Nowhere. So he would go on to direct 2 more films called Firelight and Amblin. And then before that, he attended the college at California State Long Beach. After he graduated, though, he was hired immediately.
He directed all that? that before he went to college?
Yes, actually. So that's what I have down.
That's
So
crazy.
he directed a couple films. Apparently, they must not have been like big name films at the time, but all that before attending college at California State Long Beach, and then afterwards he was hired immediately by Universal Pictures, and he would go on again to direct those other two movies, The Sugarland Express and Duel, and then finally he gets Jaws. So this is like maybe depending on how you look at it, like the third movie in his professional career,
But
fifth in
probably
his amateur.
the second theatrical release, so because Duel was straight to TV. So
Yeah.
I think a theatrical release is a big deal, especially back in the 70s.
Mm-hmm. And then this was just like a fun little tidbit since we're talking about Steven Spielberg, but I had read this little post off of Instagram that said Steven Spielberg, when he was directing Schindler's List, he was also still attending college for something. And for one of his final assignments, he actually just turned in the script for Schindler's List or something like that.
I read something about that too. All the other film students are probably like,
I don't know how to make a movie,
really?
Steven Spielberg. I've made 20.
Yeah, really pushing the curve of the grading scale for everybody there, huh?
He's that guy in the class.
Yeah. No, that's incredible though. I mean, he's really one of the like iconic directors of our time. You know, we're so grateful to be in the same era that we get to watch his films and watch the things that he's created. But I will say this was not done without like an army of brilliant people behind him.
Oh, 100%.
I will add on as a fun fact, Steven Spielberg thought that John Williams' score, the da-da-da-da, was a joke when he first submitted it.
Really? You know, I guess it makes sense because it's just like it's a 2-note thing pretty much.
It's very simple, but it's so effective. And this is a film Steven Spielberg credits as his hardest film to direct to date. Like, he had a nervous breakdown after this movie was over. He said, I watched an interview of him, and he said that he still gets nightmares about directing this film.
You know what? That's understandable, especially with how short of a time frame you're talking about for making this movie.
Oh, yeah. No, there's more drama for us to get into. So, let's talk about the writing first. They initially brought on Peter Benchley as the writer because, you know, he had just written the book, and the producers wanted to cut a lot of the side storylines to make it more of an action flick. So Peter wrote a couple of drafts, but he really struggled turning it into a screenplay. And eventually he submitted to Steven Spielberg and was like, look, this is the best I got. So they brought in Howard Sackler, who's the author of The Great White Hope, and he jumped in and wrote in the foundation of the screenplay within 3 weeks. Well, I thought it was interesting, though. He chose not to be mentioned in the credits, but he has given some credit and notice for helping write the USS Indianapolis monologue, which was recited by Quint. There's also rumors that some of that was improv as well, by the writer who was on set helping make that happen. But Steven Spielberg, like I mentioned in our last episode, was adamant that he did not want it to just be a shark movie. He wanted to add more comedy and humanity to this script. So he brought along Carl Gottlieb, who also appeared in the film as Harry Meadows, the editor of the local paper. And Carl Gottlieb was literally writing pages the night before they would film them. So while the crew is out in Martha's Vineyard after a long day of filming, getting drunk, doing who knows what, Carl and Steven Spielberg are in their hotels trying to make a script, trying to write it together, literally writing as the film is happening, which is crazy.
This does sound like a nightmare project. Oh my goodness.
I know. But it sounds so exciting at the same time. At least for me. But me being type A, who like really needs plans, it does sound like I would be in hives the entire time. Some of the lines too, they said were direct inspiration from spending time with the locals at Martha's Vineyard. Like, a lot of Quint's lines are direct inspiration from talking to some of the locals. And as I mentioned, you know, they did encourage a lot of improvisation. We're going to need a bigger boat, which is like the most iconic line of this whole movie. was improvised, which I think is just a brilliant sign that everyone knew their characters very, very well.
And it's such a simple line too. Like it's so obvious and yet somehow executed very well. I don't.
It's just chef's kiss. But yeah, I have a little bit about filming in Martha's Vineyard because that was also the drama. I mean, now in 2025, we may not look at like, oh, filming in the ocean, but this was one of the first movies to actually be filmed out on the water. They are filming miles off the land because Steven Spielberg was like, hey, I want to film this on the ocean. The water looks different than it would if we were in a tub, in a studio, or if we were on a lake. Also, I don't want people seeing land. I want that feeling of hopelessness. So with how the water in Martha's Vineyard is, it stays for miles and miles, only about 30 feet deep. So it is a little bit easier to get people out there safely. And it's because it's miles and miles of that, you can't see the shoreline. So that's why Steven Spielberg wanted to film out there. However, that proved to have a lot of trouble within itself. You know, they were using mechanical sharks. They used real sharks for some shots, which I will bring up later. But having constant shark malfunctions, the ship almost sinking, and then, of course, filming originally 50 days and then going to 155 days. He thought the crew was like gonna murder him by the end of this movie. Allegedly, like he didn't even film the last shot that they did of the film because he was like, this crew is gonna throw me overboard. So he ended up having someone else do it for him.
Mutiny.
Yeah, we got a real pirate's life happening there. But I think we would be remiss if we've talked about, you know, the idea of filming practical effects. You got weather, you got so much happening, but while filming on the actual ocean, it's insane. So I think we'd be remiss though if we did not talk about the shark himself.
Yes. All right. So here we go. My area of expertise, where I dive deep.
Quite
All
literally.
right. All right. So, talking about the shark itself. So we had mentioned it before, and you gave a little bit of more information. I'll just touch really quick on that. Yes, there was an animatronic shark. They called it Bruce. Funny enough, I've heard it was named after Spielberg's lawyer.
Oh.
I didn't write down the name of the lawyer, but that was
That's amazing. Cute.
And as I was thinking about it too and first learned about it, I also put down a little note here that says, was that also the inspiration for Bruce the Shark in Finding Nemo? Because
yeah, that's a nod to it.
Yeah, I was like, oh my gosh, that's way too coincidental. Had to be true. But basically, the shark, so again, animatronics, there were three versions of the shark, actually. So the three versions of Bruce. And each one moved in a very particular way, like left to right, or another one moved right to left. This is why they had, the three different versions. And each one was basically it was a steel skeleton with hydraulics that were used to control the jaws, allowing it to, open and close. And then there were air-powered pneumatics hidden throughout the body, underneath the skin and whatnot, to help propel it forward and move in certain directions. Each version of Bruce cost $500,000 to make.
Okay, so we know where $1.5 million of that budget went.
Exactly, Kylie.
Wow.
And here's the thing. This had never been done before. The crew was completely doubtful whether this would work at all. To help put people at ease, they ran some tests. So they put the shark in some fresh water and, just ran it about, and things worked really great. But then, as you mentioned, they filmed over in the ocean in Martha's Vineyard. Steven Spielberg liked that location better. The sharks did not do well in salt water. The salt water actually corroded the inside of each version of that shark. And this was causing major malfunctions. It was for this reason, though. So here's the thing. Although all hope seemed lost when these sharks malfunctioned, Steven Spielberg pulled it out of thin air, just, inspiration that helped really set the tone for the film. So because they had such little actual usable footage of the shark, he decided to make it more. He decided to roll with it and make it more of a like an Alfred Hitchcock style film, where we let the audience use their imaginations and let that build up fear. So if you're wondering like why don't we see the shark, towards just the end of the film, and why is it for so little, it's because all these sharks, they were malfunctioned. They couldn't handle the salt water, but Steven Spielberg rolled with it. And then you were talking about how they used real footage of the shark. They had to mix in some real shark footage that was taken off the coast of Australia. I'm not sure which coast.
I have some crazy facts about the real shark.
But yeah, that in general, that's the whole story about the animatronic shark. So if you want to talk more about the shooting of the real footage there.
Yeah, well, I want to give nods to Bob Matty, who was the designer of the animatronic sharks. He had just designed the giant squid for 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea before he jumped on this project. So I think there was probably a part of him that was like, this should be a comparable challenge to what I've already done. But like you said, it ended up being much, much more difficult. And I wanted to add one small thing to that. You mentioned, they really leaned into the like Alfred Hitchcock style, like not seeing the monster. You're looking through the POV of the monster. So they built a water box that they were able to put the camera lens like right on the water line. And it's how they ended up getting some of these really cool shots without damaging the cameras, because the cameras weren't like necessarily super waterproof and you can't just dunk them underwater all day. So they did end up building this really interesting box and contraption to make sure they could film things and actually keep their gear safe.
Yeah, and then just like with the sharks, talking about that, you just got to be extra careful on salt water. It can, regular water, as we all know with our phones, can mess up electronics. Salt water is a whole other story.
Yeah. But as I mentioned, they did use a real shark in this movie. So they had multiple great white sharks that they used, and they had a real stuntman in the cage with the shark.
Oh, you're talking about for the scene with Hooper.
The scene with Hooper. Yes. So this, they did get some sharks from Australia, and we're working with them here. So they had a stunt double that had dwarfism. I think his name was Carl Russo. I could be wrong on that. But they had to scale it because they wanted the shark to look like he was 25 feet. And the only way they could do that is by having someone that had dwarfism, so that way he made the shark look bigger. But he came into the audition bleeding because he had just gotten into a car accident on the lot. So his passion basically is what got him the job. However, he was not a diver. So when it came to the day of filming, he was definitely super nervous about that. And there are two stories that I've heard in regards to how this went down. So, story one, allegedly they threw a dummy in for part of the time that the shark was circling the cage. They had two sharks that they used, and they put one that allowed him to circle the cage. And then the shark's nose got stuck on the cage. He ripped the cage apart. Because that's what happens when sharks get stuck. They're like, oh no. They're like, not do this. But allegedly, another version of the story I heard was the stunt double was in the cage at the time that the shark's nose got stuck. And as he was ripping apart the cage, the stunt actor went into cardiac arrest when this happened. Now, these are two very different versions of the same story. So,
both sound very plausible, though. I mean,
they both sound plausible, and luckily the stunt double did not die, from what I read and what I heard. But these are two very insane, different possible theories of what went down. But it is true that they used the actual footage of the shark tearing up the cage. They used that footage in the film, which is why that particular scene looks so good, and the audience is like on the edge of their seats, because that is a real shark ripping that cage apart.
Yeah, I would have a heart attack too if I wasn't planning for that to happen, and suddenly a shark ripped open.
Yeah, I'd be like, all right, Jesus, take me now.
No, I would have, if I was lucky enough, I would have done exactly what Hooper did and just immediately hit under a rock and be like, nope.
Nope, not today.
Not today. I'm good. I got air.
I actually have a little bit about Hooper, the actor who played Hooper, if you want to learn a little more about him.
Oh, well, obviously. What do you got?
So, as I mentioned earlier, with the drama of this film, writing pages the night before, they were also really struggling with casting. So literally the writer was in the room next door writing a script while people were auditioning for this movie. So Richard Dreyfuss, even Spielberg originally offered him that role of Hooper. And Richard turned it down because he was like, that sounds awful. Like, shooting will be a disaster. Shooting on the water will suck. But his first film that he was a lead in came out shortly after he got that offer, because he thought his performance in The Apprenticeship of Buddy Kravitz was terrible. And he was like, I will never work in this town again. So he immediately went back to Steven Spielberg and was like, hey, is this role still open? So he ended up taking the role after he rejected it. Quint, the actor who played Quint, I thought something really interesting to mention was that he was almost always drunk on set. Like,
really?
The entire time, especially during the USS Indianapolis monologue.
Was that on purpose? Like some type of method acting, or was he just totally unprofessional?
He was just like an eccentric, eclectic character. That's
I would have fired him immediately.
Well, they didn't have the time or the money to do that. They were like, once you're locked in, let's go. We've only got like 50 days to film this. So yeah, he was almost always drunk on set, which is crazy to begin with. But Quint and Cooper actually really did not like each other in real life. And you can feel that. Like, you can feel some tension between them as they're filming. And I'm not necessarily sure what all the beef was there, but they really did not enjoy working together. Martin Brody, the actor who played him, he originally was more of an action star. So it was interesting that he got to go from being like in action films into this action horror thriller where he really got to play a juicy character with
a juicy character, you say?
Stop. Like a very rich character. He had a lot to offer the role. I mean, including one of the most iconic lines in horror movie history. We're gonna need a bigger boat. And then Lorraine, actually, who's the wife. She was the wife to the head of the studio. So initially, some people thought it was a political pick, but Steven Spielberg really wanted her for the role because she had a lot of energy and optimism. And he felt like they needed that in a female character in this film.
See, I didn't really like the mom character that much, but it was mostly after that boat scene where she's like, oh, the kid's just playing in the water.
Okay, that did make me crazy too. She's like, they're just in the water. And he's like, what?
They'll be fine as long as they're in the boat. And here's the thing, is that like...
I feel like he told her 4 times, like, don't go in the water. And she's like, oh, honey, you're being paranoid.
Well, here's the thing. In every other world situation, in the real world, I mean, she's got a point. Sharks don't really attack boats, but we as the audience know better.
This is a conniving shark.
And at the same time, I'm just like, you know what? If there were a shark in the water, I don't care if you're in a boat. Best to just stay out of the water anyways. Yes.
That's what you'd do if a hurricane was coming. Why not do it when there's a killer shark?
Except if you're in Florida.
Exactly. And then, the casting of Christy, the first girl we see die in this movie. So I thought about bringing her up because she actually was a stunt woman and an animal trainer. So she kind of was the perfect pick for this role. She was beautiful and charming. And I'll make sure to include the documentary links below because she gives a really interesting testimony to like her audition. But how they pulled this stunt off is they had her set up with cables to jean shorts. So she was actually thrashing in the water and 2 groups of men on the shore were pulling the cables either way to make her like sway and react in the water. But she included safety clips, so if something were to happen, because she's a stunt woman, so she knew, like, okay, safety first. She bought herself some safety clips so she could unclip herself if need be. So I thought that was really interesting to mention because, safety is really important on every set, and on sets that are as chaotic as this, at least nobody died, right?
Kylie, you sound like the person in the car is always like, put on your seatbelt, please.
I am that person. What are you talking about?
Okay, go on.
In post, though, so she had to do the voiceover of her screaming and like being pulled away. And how Steven Spielberg made that sound so authentic is that he was pouring water down her mouth as she was like screaming. He was like
He
basically
waterboarded her?
He was like waterboarding her for post production.
Scream, dang it, scream.
Scream for me. No, that's literally because they couldn't like pick up the perfect sound for that waterboarding sound of her being like thrashed around. So they did it in post, and it was literally one of the actors describes walking to the studio to record some of the like ADR post voiceover stuff, and he just saw like this beautiful model type Chrissy just having water poured down her throat by Steven Spielberg while she's screaming. So visually, I just thought that was like, like as chaotic as that movie was, it seems like it was such a once in a lifetime opportunity for every crew member and actor there. Like, I'm sure most of these crew members who have worked on things since then, and most of these actors probably don't have the same emotional connection to it as they do to Jaws, because it was just so iconic. The production was so crazy and out of control. It just really brought a different level to the filmmaking. That's pretty much all I had. I don't know if you have anything else you want to add.
Actually, Kylie, I was hoping that we could start talking about how we would survive this movie, if you're ready to talk about it.
Yeah, let's do it. Why don't you kick us off?
All right. So it's funny here, as I'm looking through my notes, the first thing I wrote down was no clue in all caps. Because here's the thing. I'll set up my whole thought process here, which was, obviously I just wouldn't go in the water. You just don't go in the water. I already don't like going in the water. It's totally fine.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that you're not a water boy. I love water. I love swimming.
No, okay. Well, here's the thing. I'll specify it, since apparently you don't know, and also just so the audience knows, I guess, too. One of my least favorite feelings in the world is being cold and wet. So, naturally, I'm not afraid of the water in any sense. No, I enjoy going to the pools. I even love a good hot tub because, you get to relax in warm, relaxing water. It's great. But I don't want to be in a cold, like ice cold pool or even in the ocean for any reason, because to me it's just miserable. I will say, you put me on a beach in Florida somewhere, that water I will gladly swim in because it is at least room temperature.
Okay.
If not
that's
warmer.
Fair.
But if we're talking like West Coast, the water there.
We were in Kauai this winter. We were all swimming around.
That was too cold for me. So here's the thing too. You put me in a beach, I just love playing in the sand. I will gladly play in the sand. When you see me try to surf, not successfully, but like paddleboard, stuff like that. I love doing those things because the goal is not to get wet.
Oh my gosh, I did not know that you had this thing against being cold and wet. I'm the opposite. Like, I don't want to stay and lay on the sand for very long unless I'm reading a book. But because the sun hates me, I have to be like almost completely covered. So there's no point. Like, I'd rather just be in the water because I'm less likely to get burnt out there. So let me just swim in the water with my waterproof sunscreen, and then I'll come back on the beach if I have to bundle up and then make myself covered for the most part so I don't get burnt.
Yeah. So, that's why I just put down, like, I'm just going to stay out of the water. I'll be totally fine. But obviously that's not as fun and exciting. So I went a little bit more in depth with doing some research here. So first off, I'm going to start with what I learned from watching The Meg, which was apparently when there's a shark nearby, one of the worst things you can do is to panic and swim frantically away, because
you look like a seal.
You look like a seal, and sharks are very good at sensing the movement of water. It's like a vibration thing, sort of. Uh, difficult to explain because I don't fully understand it. But the essentially idea is you see a shark, you have to swim slowly and calmly, no sudden movements, and the shark will more than likely stay away from you. Because sharks, they don't actually want to eat people in general.
Yeah.
We don't
Except
taste
this
good
one.
to them.
This
Yeah,
shark was an asshole.
except Bruce. And I'm going to get to that in a second here. But like, yeah, so first thing is don't swim frantically. The next thing is then I started to look, okay, like let's get a little bit further into this. What if a shark does start approaching me? And I just like looked up like what are the weak points of a shark? Apparently, and this is from like doing research from people who actually survive shark attacks, the best places to concentrate on attacking a shark if it comes up to you, go for the eyes, the gills, and the nose. Those are the most sensitive areas.
Well, no wonder that shark tore apart the cage then, because his nose got stuck. He was like,
Exactly. So if a shark were to come up to me, after I've done, relieving myself in the water because I'm freaking out. Like, okay. After that's all taken care of. Because I'm like, oh, no, I'm dead. Once that realization set in, I'm like, okay, go for the eyes, go for the gills, take out its breathing, stuff like that, or just go for the nose, whop it on the nose.
These are some good actual shark hacks because I did not go as in depth as you, so I'm learning something right now.
Oh, and then the other thing I learned too, and again, this is just research. I don't know exactly how they came to this conclusion, but once you've attacked those sensitive areas, do the opposite of what I said at the beginning. Rather than swim frantically, start swimming frantically, freak it out. The idea of like splashing around, that's apparently that helps scare it away. But only after, you've bopped it on the nose or you hit it in the eye or something, confused it. Cause as much confusion as possible at that point.
Would that work with Bruce? Because he's special.
No, I'm fully convinced it doesn't matter what you come up with, it's not going to work on Bruce.
I wrote something very similar. I was like, I don't think I would make it. Not against Bruce. I think against a shark, now that you've told me these great shark tips that I literally did not know any of them, other than swim calmly. I knew that one. But I think I would die. Yeah. And I think this is the first film where confidently I can say, like, I wouldn't see it coming the first time around, because me, I probably would be in the water just swimming. I'd be like the one person on that beach day where everyone's in the water. I'd be the one to get murdered. Now, if I knew about this and I was the one on the assault making an attack, I probably would do something similar to what was actually done and try to do some sort of explosive, because realistically, a bullet is not going to do a whole lot because it's a big shark.
Yeah.
But probably like rigging some sort of explosive to actually like take him out would be the only realistic thing to do. But no, I'm pretty sure I would die. I don't think I would survive this movie. So it makes me really glad that I'm the GM for this series instead of playing it.
Yeah, I feel like your best bet in this case is just stay out of the water. Like I said, if you're going to be in a boat, I'm trying to picture how you're going to, entail our little RPG, our little survival scenario going on. I'm picturing us kind of like being in a boat, only water along the horizon, no land whatsoever. At that point, I'm just using whatever I can to attract the shark towards the boat and get it to show its face so I can shoot it as much as possible with whether that's a bullet or a syringe or going as far as seeing if I could actually pull off the scuba air tank explosion.
Yeah. No, actually, you're pretty dead on. Our adventure next week will start aboard the Orca with Quint, Agent Nick, and with our returning guest agent, Agent Casey Jones, who is back from Narrative Feats to come play with us. So we'll be doing a Monster of the Week episode, GM'd by yours truly. That'll be coming out next week.
Yeah, so I'll be interested to see how you set it up for us, given that it's like, oh, it's a shark. Why are agents of DEAD going after a shark? I totally believe it's plausible. I haven't given it any thought. I think you could pull it off, Kylie.
Thank you. Well, I think also, the interesting thing about having you two do this film specifically, it was intentional because you guys also worked on Alien together. You guys also went after Xenomorph, which we will link below. So I feel like these two agents in particular have experience and a knack for large beasts who have, terrorized a community. So I feel like it's right up your alley. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to this episode of Survive This Crit. Make sure to come back next week for our part 1 of our Monster of the Week Jaws-inspired RPG, written and kept by yours truly, and starring Agent Casey and Agent Nick. And make sure to share this episode with a friend. Go check out Jaws while it's in theaters, and join us for the next episode next week. All right, everybody.
Bye.